So each week when we say together the Nicene Creed, we end with these words. We look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Now you might already know this, but at the time of Jesus, there was a great theological duel going on between the Sadducees and Jesus. In that time, the belief in the resurrection of the dead was a relatively new feature of Judaism, only a couple of 100 years old. The Sadducees were the intellectual class. They were the rich ones, they were the educated ones, they were the traditionalists, and they were the literalists. They only wanted to stay reading the book of Moses and admitting to what he said literally. So one of the reasons that they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead was that it seemed to conflict with the teachings of Moses. And in particular, it could not accommodate the command about the Levirate, which is the command about the brother-in-laws in receiving the widow and bringing her into his house. And so today we begin with a raucous comedy skit that has a punch. It was meant to make fun of this idea of the resurrection of the dead, to make fun of Jesus, set a little fun to their dialogue, also to set an intellectual trap for him, and thus showing that their beliefs in the resurrection were, so to speak, dead in the water. Who would have guessed what a funny, laugh-a-minute guy these Sadducees were? Their riff about the 7 brothers and that poor, childless widow might encourage us to simply imagine, just imagine that 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th brother going down that aisle. Can you picture what might go through his mind? One might ponder in your quiet moments over a cup of coffee. Did they each use the same caterer for their wedding? Did they recycle the same wedding invitations, just scratch out the first name? This is kind of what my mind does sometimes. Did the widow ever bother mothballing her dress? Questions like that. This week, Adam told me a joke. This is actually a rabbi's joke, and it was told in reference to this text. Now, I'm going to tell you right off, the 8 o'clock didn't get it, okay? I hope you can hear the lilt in the rabbi's voice when he says, if it's true that there's no sex in heaven, what's the point of hell? Good, you got it. I'm thinking that we all have questions about resurrection, even if we don't speak them out loud. If you're a human being, even from an early age, perhaps when your first dog died or your first turtle, or we all have these questions, and no matter how hard we try, we can only answer those questions from this side of the universe. Nonetheless, Jesus tells us many things when he's talking to the Sadducees. One image that stays with me is that he assures us that in the resurrection, we will be more like the angels than what we are now. Now, I want you to hear that careful wording. He doesn't say we will be angels. He says we'll be more like angels. And why is that? Because he says we are still the children of God. And yet we are defined by the operations of the Spirit. As such, the resurrection of the dead does not just look forward to a future time when the dead will go on supposedly just like they did when they were alive. That's what Jesus is onto when he talks about marriage and giving in marriage. He's not bad-mouthing sex or even our bodies. He's just reminding us that from what his vantage point is, which is from God's vantage point, and this is what he knows that we don't know, but he's letting us in, it is a whole new order of existence. To speak of the resurrection of the dead means that we have to think with him outside the box that we are in. It's when our language gives out, simply because God's realm is bigger than language can take in. I'm so glad that Jesus tries anyway. So all we can know about resurrection has to happen from now, from our limited human vantage point. And yet, listen to this. St. Paul urges the Thessalonians not to grieve as others do with no hope. He's not saying not to grieve. He's saying don't grieve without hope. So tomorrow we celebrate Veterans Day, and I've been struggling all week to know what story might well convey the hope that gives us a touchstone, a taste of resurrection now. So a couple of weeks ago, I brought my dad to the VA clinic. I hadn't been there with him. I'd been to the other VA, but I hadn't been to this clinic in Coeur d'Alene. It was a rainy kind of day, and I drove up. My dad can't walk so well, but there, even standing outside, was a dapper middle-aged man in uniform, simply there to open the door for my dad. And as he did so, he saluted my dad. My dad always wears his World War II cap, and not only him, but every single person was there to salute and say thank you. You know, our VA clinics get a lot of bad raps these days, in my opinion. I could not say enough about what I saw happening that day. The doctor, and you know how doctors are, 10 minutes in, 10 minutes out, and typing the whole time. She was looking and talking to him for an hour and a half. I can't say enough about those veterans. They were all veterans there, serving veterans. I want to tell you another story. This one I saw on a YouTube, and to me it conveyed the miracle of resurrection that starts from our vantage point. Another true story. They didn't mention the name of the veteran. They only said this. They said he went to Vietnam, and now his life is played out. We don't know much more whether he had a good and happy life or not. But they did know this: he was there alone and dying, very much alone. Evidently, a social worker there noticed this, and she thought, that's not right. And what she happened to find out when she spoke to the man is that he had to put his beloved dog Scrappy into the local pound before he came into hospice care that day, or actually some weeks before that. And she had a suspicion that that dog was key to his life. And what she did was somehow, even though a very, very overworked and busy person, she made it a point to go back to the pound. She found Scrappy, who happened to be an ugly, rat-looking little dog. She convinced them to let her bring that dog into the hospital. Didn't have a little service thing on at all. When Scrappy saw him on that bed, Scrappy started licking his face in joy, jumping up and down. And it meant so much to that nameless veteran that had no one else with him. All day long, they sat huddled together. Someone thought to take photos of what was happening, about that little dog and that man holding him tight, that ugly little rat dog. It was an amazing day of grace for them, but also for everyone else around them, and today, even so for us. Perhaps holding Scrappy that one last day was what all of us need. And I want you to hear this. We need it to hold on to the mystery of the ravishing love that Jesus promises the Sadducees and promises us. Jesus does not answer all of our questions. One of our fondest illusions is that he should. But what he does is this. He points us to a God whose faithfulness to those whom God has called is immeasurable and inexhaustible. And in that faithfulness, we find enough to endure all that life and death asks of us. Our only hope is to live alive in the resurrection's promise today, to notice how to make this world a little bit more like heaven, which is what that lovely, unnamed social worker did that day. And to trust that that veteran died as we all should, surrounded by a special kind of love and care. That's the best we can offer to our loving Abba, and he will take care of the rest. Amen.